Tell them to call me. I'm still available to talk if they want to be the heroes, because someone's going to need to step up once the public really grasps that these politicians have victim money, burn victims, widows, orphans, cancer patients, people who buried their parents at a young age. That's just horrific to keep the money from people like that. And I think somebody should want to be that person to make it right.
Yes. Well, hopefully, maybe when someone listens to this, they will. Are you shocked? Because, like you say, Tom was, one of the best trial lawyers ever, a criminal, sure, but phenomenal at the job. Like, are you shocked that we're here? Because I
Yeah.
really didn't think we would ever be here. I really thought that he would get out of this completely.
I thought I would end up dead before this happened. I mean, just being blunt. And then even when it looked like, he wasn't going to be able to do this anymore, I didn't think he would ever get in front of a jury. Not that I thought he would take a plea deal. It's way too narcissistic for that. I never thought that. And people who do these kind of, white collar crimes, they believe that what they did somehow was okay, that they were entitled to it in some sort of way. But yeah, I did not think, I figured he would either, pass away before we got to this point, or he would move it out so long, or that he would be ruled incompetent. I'm actually surprised, not after watching the competency hearing, because it seemed pretty obvious if you went to the 3 days, like you didn't need to be an expert or some legal, guru. I mean, it's kind of silly. And even up to this point, like, I know they're going to argue Kimon stole a lot of money, the bookkeeper, and he was running the show. Like, yeah, right. This narcissistic guy who treated Erika kind of crazy in some of the episodes on the Housewives. He let some bookkeeper guy who was a math teacher before he worked at Girardi Keese run the whole show. Like, is a jury going to believe that? Like, I just don't know how far the Kimon did it thing is going to go, And then, so what's his other thing? Okay, he was incompetent. Well, the judge has already ruled he is competent. How's he going to convince a jury that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that he was incompetent? He might as well just say, like, Colonel Mustard, did it in the den with the candlestick. I mean, at this point, seriously, I don't know. I feel like it will get kind of crazy at some point, even the coverage, because what is he going to be saying to try to get the blame off of himself?
Right. Or do you think you'll actually get called to the stand by
He
the
won't.
prosecution?
He won't get on the stand.
You don't think
One of the questions
he
that was
will?
asked in the jury questionnaire was, basically, do you have a bias in a case where the defendant doesn't testify? So that tells me he's not testifying, because they want to weed people out. And who wouldn't judge that? And that seem like that's everybody? I mean, I guess there's exceptions, sure. But I would think most regular people, and juries are really, really smart. I mean, and I think this is why people are fascinated, in a sense, with true crime, because juries are so much smarter than people give them credit for. It's kind of like how we treat kids sometimes, that we think kids don't know what's going on, but they really do. A jury of your peers, they can figure it out. The only time we get weird verdicts is when we have cover-ups by law enforcement, or sometimes when judges do things and the jury doesn't get to see all the evidence. And so with the evidence they saw, that's how they have to rule. I mean, juries are just really smart, and they usually get it right. And so, we're going to be in their hands soon.
Do you think you'll get called? Do you think the prosecution will actually call you?
I think I have a 50-50 chance. I think, Tom's defense team seems sort of like hyper focused on the Gomez's litigation and my podcast, which seems, like they'll love this, but it's my perspective. It looks desperate. Looks desperate to be freaked out about me and Kathy. And that's not to say that we haven't fought really hard for this moment to come to get justice. But we have every right to fight for justice for ourselves and for all the victims. And if that's what they want to come at me about, is that, I'm biased for the victims, I mean, put that shit on my tombstone, will you?
And I don't even understand, why are they so concerned with the podcast? I mean, you have been on my podcast before. You've been speaking about this. This isn't like you're breaking your silence after 5 years of working for Girardi Keese. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, I mean, I sound like I'm bragging about myself, which is just great.
It's
I've turned
okay.
into one of
People
those
think
people.
that I
I
brag
have
about
a
myself.
podcast. I'm like, I've turned into one of those people who are like, have you heard my podcast? But I do feel like there was something really powerful, adding Chris Hansen's voice to the Girardi story, someone that is very well known in the true crime, community. And then also, again, to let victims really talk. Our podcast does that. If you want to get to know Kathy Gomez, who you've, seen and heard about in news articles or in clips here and there on like Housewife and the Hustler, or Danny Barnes, who worked for Lockheed Martin and, was a Girardi Keese client for almost 20 years and didn't get justice. And then Josie Hernandez, who is one of the 4 victims, along with Kathy Gomez and her son, that are actually in the trial. If you want to get to know them a little bit or really hear about what happened to them, then you can do that with our podcast. And I think that it freaked them out a little bit to hear their stories because they're powerful, which is why they filed to block the jury from hearing too much about their injuries. Because when you hear about Joe Gomez's injury, when you hear he was burned on 90% of his body, 3rd-degree burns, and was in a coma for months and had over 30 surgeries and lives in pain, excruciating pain every day, that can be really compelling.
Mhm. Yeah, sure. And is that is blocked? We're at that point.
It
It's already been
is.
blocked. Wow.
Yeah, so they'll get to know that Joe was burned. They'll get to know a little bit to know how they became a client, but they're not going to be allowed to belabor, what these injuries were. And, so there's 4 cases. One lady's husband died in a boating accident. Another case was a husband and wife, who were since divorced, but at the time, husband and wife and their young son were in a car wreck, and the young son was paralyzed. Then we have Joe Gomez, who, I just mentioned his horrific injuries. And then Josie Hernandez, who had a vaginal mesh, reaction, it was toxic to her body and it made her very sick